Conventional and dissenting wisdom. Are they applicable to our everyday lives? Hi, my name is Alan Mitchell, and today for my presentation, I will be discussing conventional wisdom, dissenting wisdom, the critical issues within them, and how they apply to the social context of my teaching community and its points of need in my address, and how this is connected to the books of wisdom. I will also describe my specific ideas for communicating this issue, the challenges I may face, and how I plan to address them. What are the books of wisdom? There are three books considered the books of wisdom. These books are the book of Proverbs, the book of Job, and the book of Ecclesiastes. In the book, the Hebrew Bible, a comparative approach, the author, Christopher D. Stanley, points out that a number of other books, such as Psalms, in various chapters, and the Song of Solomon, or also known as the Song of Songs, reflect the style of the wisdom books. These books are also included in the writings and known in the category of poetic books. The other books containing the style of wisdom writings are the narrative books, also known as the Book of Ruth and the Book of Esther. They too are included in the writings. Dr. Brooke Lester made the connection in his lecture between the wisdom writings and the first 6 chapters of the Book of Daniel, and how the style of the wisdom writings is reflected in them. But the focus of this presentation will be specifically on the wisdom writings. There were 3 things about the writings that I didn't know prior to listening to the lectures and readings on wisdom. These things are conventional and dissenting wisdom and how they apply to the books of wisdom. Although it may not seem like a huge deal, I also find it very interesting that the wisdom writings don't appeal to the Exodus or Promised Land. Other characteristics are to listen to the instructions of the wise, or choosing righteousness over wickedness, and the characteristic displayed in the book of Job called binary comparisons between 2 types of people, 2 types of action, or 2 different points of view. But I think that the absence of the Exodus and Promised Land, conventional and dissenting wisdom, would be cool to pass on to the lay people of my church. First, I would like to talk about the absence of any appeal to the Exodus or the Promised Land in the wisdom writings. For example, part of the wisdom writings, such as Proverbs, would demand that a person must be righteous in order to receive the blessings of God. But as you read, you wouldn't find one of the biggest themes of the Old Testament, which is some kind of reference to the Exodus and the Promised Land. Deuteronomy chapter 26, verses 6 through 9, talks about how the Egyptians were harshly treating and afflicting the Israelites, imposing hard labor on them. But when the Israelites cried out to the Lord, the God of their ancestors, God heard their voice, saw their oppression, and delivered them from the hands of Egypt. Joshua chapter 24, verses 16 through 18, brings up how the Israelites will not or refuse to worship any other gods because the God of their ancestors delivered them from the hand of slavery and out of Egypt. So since God protected them, they will serve no other God but their God, Yahweh. There are many other texts in the Old Testament that make some reference of the Lord bringing the people of Israel out of slavery into a place of liberation for them. But the writings of wisdom never make any reference to these events. More specifically, the books of wisdom don't demand that because the Lord brought them out of Egypt, that they should act, live, or talk a certain way to avoid curses and to moreover receive blessings. Neither does it state that the same thing should be done because the Lord brought them out of Egypt. In fact, it seems that there is a broad appeal to the human experience of the world and even the people of that time. I could be reading into the wisdom writings a bit much, but it also seems that the writers of the books of wisdom would suggest that God's ostensible ways with the world and humanity goes far beyond placing rules and regulations, do's and don'ts, righteousness and wickedness for the favored people of Israel. I believe that this would be something worth pointing out, since we find the theme of Yahweh and his favored children of Israel in most of the Old Testament. It also makes a point to show us that these rules and regulations that are in the wisdom writings go far beyond than to the children of Israel, but they are for all of humanity, it seems. Which leads me to conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom features blessings and curses and creation themes. The book of Proverbs is a great representation of conventional wisdom. Dr. Lester says righteous action is self-evident and outcomes are largely predictable. To be wise means to be righteous, which then leads to a blessed life. To be foolish is to be wicked, which then leads to the curses in life. The book of Proverbs are great examples of conventional wisdom. There are also biblical narratives, as I said earlier, as Daniel 3 and chapter 6, where it speaks of the Hebrew boys in the fiery furnace and Daniel in the lion's den. These exemplify the results of following the will of the Lord, because in the end of the stories, they were all delivered from whatever they were bound in or that was threatening their life. Another part of conventional wisdom is seen in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verses 1 through 8, chapter 7 verses 1 through 13. When interpreted, these writings seem to suggest that the idea of conventional wisdom is that God has made the world a sensible place in which actions have fairly reliable consequences, or we praise God for such a world. It also reflects this in certain kinds of experiences. Dissenting wisdom, on the other hand, represents and validates this counter experience of the world. This is the experience of unaddressed injustice. For example, good works go unrewarded for long periods of time, and evil or bad works go unpunished for periods of time as well. So then this world that is presented by dissenting wisdom is set up for the view of conventional wisdom. It isn't as dependent, and the righteous don't experience such a great insurance policy as presented in conventional wisdom. For conventional wisdom offers guidelines to survival. The right action sounds like recipes for prosperity, a sense of reliability that comes close to guarantee. Dr. Lester says that. But dissenting wisdom instructs one to endure the trials and tribulations of the inevitable storms of life, or the wicked evildoers who dwell within. The book of Job is a great example of dissenting wisdom. When Job was tempted and everything but his life was taken from him, he decided to still worship the Lord and stay faithful to the Lord's will despite his unfortunate circumstances. For the present or modern readers of the books of wisdom, it can be somewhat challenging to figure out which model of conventional and dissenting wisdom was labeled as the way for them, or a way of thinking or doing. On a more personal level, what should be done for religious believers who may be faced with troubled times in their life? It seems that conventional wisdom leaves a closed door or of understanding in limited options in life, or if life isn't as good as I desire, then that could mean that I am somehow wicked or out of the will of God. But dissenting wisdom seems to have a better explanation of the realities of life. In other words, things happen, but the outcome of these unfortunate circumstances is determined by how we react towards them. How does this apply to the social context of my teaching community? Well, I'm glad you asked. Most Protestant conservative African American denominations are firm believers in what they call holiness doctrine. This in its entirety means that to live righteous according to the literal biblical translations or interpretations. If you live holy, you will have a blessed and prosperous life. But if you sin or rebel against the word or laws of God, then you will be punished, most likely from God. If there are no signs and wonders reflecting this prosperous reward of doing right and resisting evil, sometimes it is said that you are somehow still unrighteous in some area of your life, and reevaluation is needed. This reflects the same stipulations of conventional wisdom. But what happens when this is applied to everyday thinking? Theologically, this presupposes that God blesses only the righteous, and those who are wicked or sinners will reap their punishment. When certain texts from the books of wisdom reflect conventional wisdom, it immediately makes me wonder if God only blesses those who believe in Him and follow His commandments. But then what happens to financially stable and happy atheists, agnostics, or the occasional sinner, according to Christians? There seems to be no room for grace. I feel that this addresses a basic need in my teaching community that helps address some questions of God's unchanging character. And if it is unchanging, then the God we preach to be merciful and just isn't seen in conventional wisdom, but God is instead one-sided. It also addresses the issue of prosperity gospel. There is a growing number of ministers that preach if you give God or the church a certain amount of money, act a certain way, or buy a particular item, then your life will be blessed. Dissenting wisdom, on the other hand, makes room for the reality and understanding of life, wisdom, and how to react when troubled times occur. Even when someone is attempting to be righteous on his or her best days, it is still possible for him or her to have a tragic and unfair event to occur. Every day, good and bad things happen to the just and unjust, regardless of their works. Job is a great example of this. This is important information to pass because it can change a person's negative or perspective view towards God. It may take the blame away from God and towards something else that doesn't say that God caused this turmoil in my life. The best way to communicate this is by simply sharing day-to-day struggles in our life and relating them to Scripture and working through the contradictions and problems that makes us uncomfortable. I believe that every person has had a bad day despite their righteous attempts or acts. I also believe that everyone recognizes that what we would label as unjust, for example, like drug trafficking or drug dealing or any other forms of making money illegally, these same men and women who do these things sometimes get away with it. They even live prosperous lives, having everything they need and want, while other people in the world work hard and rarely see the benefits of their labor. But then questions that I expect in response to these explanations of God working through conventional and dissenting wisdom is the ultimate theodicy question. Why do bad things happen to good people? This is a challenge for me because even in the book of Job, I don't see an answer clear enough. Job is still rewarded after his unfortunate events. He receives what most Christians call double for his trouble. Whether righteous or wicked, people die every day from natural disasters, terminal illnesses. They're murdered, raped, robbed, fired from their jobs, and so many other things. Some might ask where God is in their time of need, or where is God for the faithful and just Christian, or the African child starving to death, or the many African slaves who died in the name of Christianity by the very hand or the very kind of people who proclaim to worship the same God or Jesus Christ. This is challenging for me, and especially since I don't have an answer. The only thing I can say is both conventional and dissenting wisdom possess value. They both teach that righteousness and faithfulness has its rewards. But life as we know it is unfair, painful, and unjust. The inevitable pains of life have been around for many years and will continue to exist. Until an answer is found, I feel that life is experienced only one day at a time. So learning from your pain, growing from your blessings, and embracing life, for although it may seem unbearable, should be your focus. For life is still miraculous and precious. This is my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave your comments and concerns. Thank you so much.